Welcome to Agatha Christie, She Watched, with Teresa Peschel. We left the Orient Express last week, and this time we're in Mesopotamia with Murder in Mesopotamia, the David Suchet Poirot episode from 2002. And with me is, of course, the star of the show, Teresa Peschel. Hi, Teresa.
Hi, Bill. It's always such a thrill to be here with you, even though I just saw you mere moments ago at the breakfast table.
That's true.
But here we are.
Absolutely. And like I said, we're now in Mesopotamia. And what did you think of it?
I was disappointed. It was flat. There's so much in the novel. The novel is a very subtle novel, not the least of which is because it's narrated entirely by Amy Letheran, who is a nurse on the scene. She is in some ways a dispassionate observer, and in other ways she is very much involved in her observations. You can see her own prejudices come out in full. She certainly starts off by seeing Poirot as a ridiculous, posturing mountebank, and she has very mixed feelings about Mrs. Leidner and the group of people at the dig. And there's a lot about Louise Leidner, lovely Louise as she's called in the text. And all of that fell by the wayside. They replaced almost all of Amy Letheran's part with Hastings, and I understand that this is a TV show, and it's called Poirot, and so Poirot has to be there at the very first scene, even though that's not what happens in the novel. But I mean, really, Anyway, it looks like you want to say something.
Absolutely, because it might be useful to set up the situation, because this takes place at an archaeological dig outside of Baghdad, an hour's drive from Baghdad. And it's sort of like the other standalone novels that she's done, where you have, instead of a dysfunctional family, you have a dysfunctional archaeological site.
This is true.
You have Dr. Leidner, who's the head of the dig. He recently married, what was it, a year ago?
Like 2 years before, he married Louise Leidner, who is one of those women that everybody else talks about. Occasionally you meet someone who just radiates charisma. You can't take your eyes away from them. They are the center of every room. Every eye is upon them. That is lovely Louise. And in fact, the novel sets up a huge amount of time with lovely Louise, so you get an idea of what she's like. And there are other characters in the novel who call her that. When Amy Letheran is at her previous post and getting ready to go join the Leidner expedition, the people that she is working for all know who lovely Louise is. They talk about her, and they even use a French word, à la muse. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but essentially it translates into tease. Mm-hmm. If you like, you can add a word in front of that.
Well, and the episode starts because, of course, we have to have Poirot in at the beginning. And this is one reason why I think they brought Hastings in, because Hastings is the uncle of one of the members of the expedition, and he invites Poirot to come in.
Even though this is the first time we have gotten any intimation of any kind that Hastings has any living relatives. He has lots of friends, but this is the very first time we ever hear that our man Hastings was not put upon this earth fully formed, with no parents, siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, anything.
Well, I'm sure Agatha left the fan fiction writers to flesh that out.
And I'm sure they have.
Yep. But what also this means is that, to give a little background, this is the next to last series of Poirot episodes that they were filming. And this is at a time in the Poirot series where they went from the 60-minute episodes to the 90-minute episodes, and they wanted to ITV wanted to make these movies. So they were going to be bigger. They had bigger budgets. There was a lot more writing on these, even though the Poirot series was being sold worldwide. And I think they brought in Hastings not only as a way of getting Poirot in at the beginning, but Hastings is a popular figure in the series. And then, why not bring him in if at all possible?
It's fan service. Hastings is fan service. And it really was a surprise in a way that they didn't dredge up somehow Miss Lemon and Inspector Japp. I mean, Miss Lemon would have probably been easy. Poirot would have telegraphed to Miss Lemon to do some research back in the old country. But they didn't. And so you have Poirot showing up at the beginning of the dig, at the very beginning of the episode, rather than halfway through after the murder has taken place. And Agatha sets that up very well in the novel. Poirot is called in because he happens to be there by chance. It's purely coincidence. And that also solves the problem. And the TV show does this all the time. And it's particularly egregious here, where Leidner has the world-famous detective whom they all know about because Bill Coleman is Hastings' nephew, and Hastings has told him everything, and Bill Coleman has told everyone there at the dig everything. And so Professor Leidner has Hercule Poirot on site, and he still goes ahead and murders his wife.
Oh, spoiler alert. Sorry about that. Spoiler alert.
I'm going to do that all the time, so get over it. And that is so stupid. That is so stupid, because any thoughtful, careful, well-organized murderer is not going to commit the murder when the world-famous private detective is on site. They just aren't going to do that unless circumstances force their hand, like in Murder on the Orient Express. Circumstances forced their hand. Now, in the novel, in the novel of Mesopotamia, Poirot just happens to be off-site. And Leidner very carefully planned out the murder. That's the reason why he wanted Amy Letherin there. He needed a nurse on site, both to look after lovely Louise, but also so that he could have someone pin down the time of death to a time when he wasn't there, when he was on the roof and everyone could see him. Mm-hmm. And he needed that, and that's one of the reasons why he hired Amy Letherin to come out and be a nurse for lovely Louise.
Mm-hmm. I also want to back up for a moment because they made another major change at the beginning and the end. If you want to describe.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. I know she's in the canon, but for some mysterious reason, the scriptwriter decided that there wasn't enough action happening in the dig site in Mesopotamia. So no, we have to have Poirot arrive in Mesopotamia because he was called suddenly by Countess Vera Rusakov. She needs his help. She's at a hotel in Baghdad. He must come at once. And he arrives and she's nowhere to be seen. And so you get these scenes, multiple scenes, where Poirot is pleading with the concierge of the hotel in Baghdad, "Oh, please, has any word arrived from the Countess?" No, 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 no. Until finally, at the end, the concierge approaches Poirot. "You have a message from the Countess?" "Why, yes, I do. It was a very bad telephone connection, and she wants you to pay her bill."
And she's in Budapest.
And she's in Budapest, by the way. On her way to Shanghai.
Which is, I think, a really missed opportunity, because and this is an episode full of missed opportunities, because we have Mrs. Leidner. The whole story revolves around her and her attractiveness, her charm, her ability
allure
to manipulate everybody. And we have the Countess kind of doing the same thing to Poirot, but not, I don't know it was ever really brought out as much. It could have been a nice little parallel plot. And
it wasn't. And what it did is it wasted precious time. This movie is only 1 hour and 38 minutes long, and that is not a lot of time. And the time wasted standing in front of the concierge desk at the hotel is time that could have been spent figuring out more of the personality of lovely Louise. This is a woman that basically every single person in the English expat community in the Middle East knows about. And she, in the novel, Poirot has to decipher, he has to figure out why she was murdered, and it all comes down to what kind of a woman that she was. And so he interviews everyone, and a number of characters were either disappeared altogether or were squeezed together, compressed, where you take two characters and turn them into one, or three characters and turn them into one. We're seeing time wasted on Vera Rusakov when what we should be seeing is Poirot interviewing every single person at the site, including the Mercados, and he really didn't, and you should have been seeing flashbacks of them coming under Louise's spell, and you don't. You should be seeing a scene where Poirot is carefully investigating her room and realizing that she is not a sensualist, because there are no velvet cushions with heavy gold fringe in the place, but she loves control. She likes manipulating people.
The book titles tell him that, don't they?
Yes, there's a series of books that Poirot finds on her bookshelf, and essentially all of them are about egoists. someone who is the center of attention, someone who demands to have everyone else pay attention to them because nobody else in the world matters, whether it is her nonfiction or her fiction, her biographies, her memoirs. And these give Poirot clues to what her personality is like. And Amy Leathern gives him more, and Amy Leathern also tells him the very important story that they removed, even though it's a great story. Remember, Louise is not a sensualist, and she wants to remain in control. And yet she married, at age 20, this handsome, dashing, young man. He overcame her senses. I guess her hormones overcame her. And in the movie, it takes a little longer, a couple of months. In the movie, it is much quicker. But she discovers, oh my God, that he's a German spy. And it doesn't tell you this in the movie, but in the book, it does. She turns her husband in because she's a good patriotic girl. But Poirot's impression is she may be a good patriotic girl, but she discovered she really didn't want to be married. She didn't want to be under some man's thumb. And this was a wonderful opportunity handed to her on a silver platter of getting rid of her husband by having him go off, and you just tell everybody he was killed in the war, even though he was shot as a spy. And everybody is sympathetic for you. You're not a terrible divorcee in 1916. Oh no. You're a widow. This is a war widow. How sad. And if anybody asks any questions, well, you were a patriotic war widow. You did the worst thing that a woman could do to her husband because it had to be done for the safety of your country. And everybody will say, oh, Louise, how brave of you, how wonderful of you, oh, how self-sacrificing of you, and you'll get what you want. Everyone loves you, and you got rid of your husband.
And by the way, because it was the fact that her husband came back and married her in disguise as Dr. Leidner, he didn't say one word about it to Poirot. And by the way, the B word turned me in. That should make right. even a husband desperately attached to a woman is going to get a little grumpy about that, I would think.
Yes, that worthless, conniving bitch harpy turned me in, even though what I was doing was patriotic for my own country. Mm-hmm. So there's that. I'm losing my train of thought here. Sorry, ask me a pertinent question so I can come up with something clever and witty.
Okay, well, what we can also talk about, though, is that the situation that Mrs. Leidner found herself in, her personality, is derived from incidents in Agatha Christie's own life. Because when she originally went to the Middle East the first time to visit there was an archaeologist, Leonard Woolley, and she came out to visit, and she met his wife, Catherine Woolley.
Whom I really don't know anything about. So Bill is the person who's going to tell you folks about Catherine Woolley, because I've never read anything about her.
Well, she is essentially Mrs. Leidner, except maybe without the homicidal husband and the spying husband. But she was the same type of personality. She dominated the archaeological site. There were men who were absolutely in love with her. She wasn't as conniving, obviously, as Mrs. Leidner, but she had that charm and attractiveness. She loved being the center of attention.
She lit up the room.
And she did not tolerate women very well. But she tolerated Agatha for two important reasons. Because by the time she came out, and this was after her separation from Archie and the 11 days disappearance, this was her way of just traveling to see the world. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd had already come out, and by the time Agatha arrived on the site, Catherine had read the book and loved it. And so her favorite author was showing up to see what they were doing.
And she wasn't a threat.
And that was the second thing. She wasn't a threat. She was being there on her own. She wasn't seeking a husband or anything like that. And she was genuinely interested in the work they were doing. And so they got along very, very well. And Agatha, of course, being very observant about personalities, saw someone different from her, and I can admit, and this is what would have made this movie so much better. is really if the actress playing Mrs. Leidner actually
lit up the screen. She was a bony redhead. And sorry, folks, but that low-cut dress that we're seeing really showing off, you could see her entire upper skeletal structure, and the skin tightly stretched over it. And maybe that's why she married Dr. Leidner at last. And that's something else. People say, oh, my God, how could this woman marry a man and not know that she had married him before? Well, when you think about the setup, Louise married Frederick Bosner. That's husband number one. That's the German spy. She married him as a 20-year-old. She was probably a virgin at the time because a lot of well-bred young ladies in 1916 generally didn't put out before they got a ring on it. She wasn't a sensualist. And so she may have been having the sex with her husband in the dark, but within 2 or 3 months, her husband was gone. So you have somebody 2 or 3 months of being in their bed, and then 15 years later, and his face is different. He's put on weight. He's gotten old. He's grown a beard. He has a different name. He's an archaeologist. Everything about him is different. And think back very carefully. If I think back 15 years, I think of Bill because that's who I was with 15 years ago. But if I have to think back 40 years ago, I am not remembering. I don't remember. Especially for someone, that had such a short time together with each other. Yeah, you had a very short time with someone, and everything about them, they're working very hard to be a different man, and you aren't necessarily going to connect them. And a very subtle thing in here, it's not spelled out in the text, but when you are lovely Louise and 20 years old, that is very different from being lovely Louise and 35. The difference between 20 and 35 in a woman's life, and sorry folks, this is just the way reality is, you're an old bag compared to that young 20-year-old Sheila Maitland. You just don't have that vibrancy of youth. And if you don't have the personality, the skills, the talent, the effervescence to overshadow that young 20-year-old, well, who are the gentlemen going to pay attention to? It's not going to be you. Sheila Maitland, by the way, is the daughter of the Superintendent Maitland, who is forbidden to ride out to the archaeological site. And if you ever want to encourage somebody to do something, you forbid them. That's right, and that's exactly what happens. She shows up, and who is she trying to vamp on? She was trying to vamp on Richard Carey. Oh, yes, the best friend of Dr. Leidner. Yes, Richard Carey is Dr. Leidner's best friend, and again, that's a very complicated relationship between him and Dr. Leidner and lovely Louise that the movie, when it wasted time on Vera Rusikoff, did not explore more fully. Because apparently, again, the novel goes into a lot more detail. Apparently, Richard Carey and Dr. Leidner had been on various digs for a number of years. They knew each other very well. They were best friends as well as employee and boss. They got along great. And then Dr. Leidner married lovely Louise and brought her out to the dig. And the first year, apparently, it went okay. Miss Johnson was okay with it. Richard Carey was okay with it. And then lovely Louise decided that they weren't in her orbit. She wasn't controlling them. And so she started essentially to mentally seduce Richard Carey. And then the worst happened. He fell in love with her, which is what she wanted. But she fell in love with him, which she did not expect. This is Poirot's deduction. And it was partially confirmed in the novel by Richard Carey. And Dr. Leidner could tolerate, because he knew what kind of woman Louise was, he could tolerate having everyone around her adore her, but he couldn't tolerate her adoring anyone else. He has that classic attitude of, if I can't have you, no one can. And so there was a very complicated story there, a very passionate story, and you didn't get any of it. You didn't get any of it. Yeah. Nothing. Yeah. And the whole point of the murder, why lovely Louise was murdered, is because of who she was, because of the kind of woman that she was. Because again, obviously Dr. Leidner was obsessed with her. She sent him to be executed as a spy. He was able, by a miracle in a train wreck, to escape and to reinvent himself as a completely different person, and he still went back for seconds.
Mm-hmm. Now, in general, I thought that the movie was excellently put together. The Poirot productions are of a we're going to be repeating ourselves.
It looks great.
It looks great. The sets were fabulous. Poirot, David Suchet as usual. The more you see him, and I've been watching for the last 2 years a lot of Poirot episodes, and he is a great actor.
He's really good. He is really, really good. But I don't think the script served him well in this case at all.
Yeah.
Now, I understand why they put Hastings in, but I wouldn't have done that. And I understand why they put Poirot in at the beginning. And they could have done it this way. This is where Poirot shows up at the beginning, and that is you open with lovely Louise's murder. And Poirot happens to be conveniently on site in Baghdad because he's on his way from someplace in Syria to some other place because he was untangling an issue for the British military in Syria. So he just conveniently happens to be there. Colonel Maitland brings Poirot out to investigate the murder. And then you go back to the beginning when Amy Leathern arrived on site, and you do everything through flashbacks. And you could do that. You could do everything through flashbacks. You could get all of the backstory that the episode completely omitted, including Poirot deciphering what kind of a person lovely Louise was. And then you still end up with the same denouement, exactly the same, but it would have been a much more satisfying movie because you would have understood better who this woman was.
Yeah.
Why she was so compelling that Frederick Bosner not just married her the first time, but after she had sent him away to be executed as a spy, came back as a different man and married her again, proving that Samuel Johnson was right, that remarriage is the triumph of hope over experience.
And, they would have had to recast the actress playing Mrs. Leidner as well. And we were talking about this last night, and it popped into my head how much Francesca Annis would have done with this. It would have been a fabulous role for her. Oh, yeah.
It would have been... She would have done so much better because she lit up the screen. Francesca Annis lights up the screen. And whatever anonymous bony redhead they had playing this part... I have to look at my list. Wait, let me look at my...
You don't want me to say her name? I don't want to say her name. It's not her fault that she was miscast, I think.
And I don't know that the script gave her enough to work with either.
No. Longing looks a little bit here and there, but nothing to show. How bad it got, that the dinner party scene when Hastings was the liveliest guest there.
And he was doing his best. That's right. It was an uncomfortable, awkward meal, and Hastings was doing his best like a gentleman should to keep the conversation limping around. And even though he's lecturing archaeologists about the meaning of the word Mesopotamia and the names of the rivers that are being separated, the land being separated by the two rivers, and he can't remember, but he's trying.
Yeah.
He is doing his darndest to keep this dinner moving forward like a gentleman should.
Absolutely. He was the one with the manners. So, after all of this, do you think people should see this?
Depends on how you feel about archaeology. If you're absolutely fascinated with archaeology, yeah, sure, watch the movie because again, you're there on the dig, and they always do a great job on these sites.
Yeah,
you see the diggers, you see the site itself, you see all of the equipment, all of the paraphernalia. Oh, that reminds me of another missed thing that they did, and that was the whole subplot with Father. I'm gonna have to look up his name here, Lavigny, Father Lavigny, who turns out to be an antiquities thief. And he is apparently making copies of the particularly valuable pieces, making plasticine copies of them, and then they're recast, and he substitutes the fakes for the real ones, and the real ones go off to be sold. And you actually see Hastings asking for plasticine. And Miss Johnson does not say, as she does in the text, we've been running through plasticine like crazy. We're just about out. I have no idea what's been going on.
Yeah,
or the mention of the wax. The mention of they mention the wax on the beautiful gold drinking cup, and Nothing. And yet this is very important to Poirot because this is how he works out that Father Lavigny is not who he claims to be, but is instead an antiquities theft. And it was set up right there in the script. And then you go off and go looking for Countess Vera Rusakov.
And they never come back to it at all.
Yeah, they never come back to it at all.
The plasticine at all. Not really much about the wax. And that's why at the end when he was revealed and he goes, runs off, and I'm thinking, why was he making fake copies? And how does he benefit from that? And they didn't really explain too much at the beginning, which the beginning episode in which an Arab is murdered.
Oh, yes, and that was another thing is they made Mr. Mercado was always a drug addict, but here they turned him into a murderer because I guess there wasn't enough excitement in terms of the psychological.
Was he the one who did it?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. He murdered his drug dealer because his drug dealer wanted a little more money.
Oh. How did you know that? I don't remember them saying anything. I thought it was the father. I guess maybe trading or selling the stolen antiquities because they had a seal that was missing.
Oh, no, we were told several times that I think it wasn't Abdullah who was murdered, but whoever that man was that was strangled at the beginning, he was a known small thief and a drug dealer. They specifically said drug dealer.
Right. They say
and
that.
In fact, towards the end, Colonel Maitland, I think it's Colonel Maitland, maybe it's Captain Maitland. Superintendent Maitland says that he and Poirot reached the conclusion that because of the drug connection and because of Mercado's suicide note that he had strangled his drug dealer when his drug dealer asked for more money.
Oh, that must have been one of those times I fell asleep.
Which is not a good recommendation for this movie, folks. It really isn't.
Well, you're on the couch and we had Veronas and,
which were very good, by the way.
Very tasty. Pepperidge Farm Veronas, Boss cookies. And yeah, I kind of checked out a couple of times.
Well, I don't check out because I have to write a review on this, so I have to sit through it and watch every minute. And okay. I did.
Boy, I did miss it.
And yes, if you are... It's always worth watching David Suchet as Poirot. Always worth watching him. And if you're interested in archaeology, then definitely you want to see this because you get some lovely shots of an actual working dig. And it's probably fairly accurate because they like doing this sort of thing right. Mm-hmm. But after that, yeah, I don't know. If you've read the novel, you'll be disappointed. If you haven't read the novel, you'll probably be okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of another podcast. So fun. Absolutely. And thank you all to listening to Teresa Reviews Agatha Christie Movies.
And next time is Sparkling Cyanide.
We'll see you again next week.